United South Broadway Corporation, promoting community building, youth development, fair housing, and fair lending in New Mexico since 1986. We work with community advocates in 6 key areas: fair housing and fair lending, crime prevention, financial literacy, locally based commercial development, and opportunities for youth. USBC offers free HUD-certified housing, counseling, and legal services to homeowners statewide facing mortgage delinquency or foreclosure. And we offer anti-racism trainings for policymakers. Welcome to United South Broadway Corporation.
So Diana, I wanted to ask you about the Mainstreet program and the facade improvement work that USBC has done.
Yeah, so we're of the mind that you cannot just do housing. You have to have, if you really want to build a neighborhood and build wealth in a neighborhood, there have to be opportunities for people to spend their money. Poor neighborhoods, I guess you could say they're economically poor, but they do bring money in. The question is, where do they spend their money? And so when I grew up here, we had a drugstore on the corner, we had laundromats, we had dry cleaners and bakeries and florist shops and dry goods stores, that kind of thing. And so in South Broadway, we have, in these old neighborhoods, there are some true commercial corridors, like South Broadway, 4th Street, there's Mountain Road. There are true corridors for business. And so we wanted to really take a look at that and see, how do we bring those resources back to our neighborhood, support those that have stayed long-term and struggling to stay in place and haven't had a chance to make investment in the fiscal structure of their buildings, so they're not as attractive maybe on the outside as they'd like them to be. So we began to look at what kind of strategies might be in place. We knew we needed to bring, when you bring families in and you bring housing, you need to bring those other services in as well.
Right.
And so we began to look at strategies, and how do you do that? Well, New Mexico Mainstreet was one. But New Mexico Mainstreet gives you kind of an orientation towards how to support businesses, how to do marketing, but it really comes with no money per se. So we thought, business people are very busy, they're small business. I kind of feel like, is there something in it for them to work with us, to be a part of this? And so we said, we've got to figure out how we make some incentive and put an incentive in place. And so we went to the city of Albuquerque and we were able to get facade improvement money through the old UDAG grant. They had put some RFPs out, request for proposals, and we applied for facade improvements. And so I hired an architect. She later moved into the neighborhood, is fact. And we began to go up and down the streets. And what's so good about Cindy Lopez, Cindy was an old time architect, even though she was young, but she could draw. She didn't do AutoCAD on everything. So nothing's better than to go door to door with merchants that you're working with. We created a program that they could borrow so much, and we could actually give a grant for so much for people who couldn't afford anything. But we'd also would leverage, if you put private money, we would leverage up to a certain amount of public dollars. And in the end, I think we leveraged well over $600,000 of private investment. So it was well over a couple of $1 million of money that we put out in the neighborhoods. It started in South Broadway, South 4th Street. We began to look at the businesses, how to give them marketing support, and how to do facade improvements. So when Cindy would go out, she'd take her sketch pad with her and sit down with the business owner and begin to draw and show them. And they said, well, and they get ownership in that drawing. And then we would provide them with the money and the construction support. We hired contractors to work with us and the businesses to actually put in place awnings, painting, signage, all of those things that are important for retail and to get people in your door. That program expanded from South Broadway to 4th Street to Mountain Road to Central. The Huning Highland neighborhood is Central. And then we began to do East Central programming because we came pretty good at signage, and we wanted to preserve, as part of Mainstreet, we wanted to preserve all the old neon signs on Route 66. And so we began to take a look at that, and we began to do signage in those commercial areas as well. It just became something that it just brought the whole community together, because the downtown core is, yes, it's these old neighborhoods, If you go to, going West Central, you'll see a lot of those old hotels and things. And we did some in this part and in the south part of Central as well. So we began again to just build an expertise on how to do facade improvements. And we won a lot of awards in the Mainstreet program for doing that. Mainstreet saw the they have a program that you can put in place, but you've got to have resources tied to it. It's got to be capital money tied to it. And so those main streets around the country that are the most productive have found out a way to bring a financial resource as well.
Just like you did with the facade improvement,
right.
That type of money.
Right, exactly. And Main Street is kind of the umbrella that keeps those meetings going with the merchants, having discussions and going and just kind of working together around marketing and outreach as well. So we do campaigns and things like that to promote their businesses.
So this is all about neighborhood stabilization, the commercial part, the residential part, the homeowner part, the public spaces, preventing crime, everything.
Yeah, and it's about closing the generational wealth gap, having people be able to age in place and not be displaced by improvements that take place, because our biggest challenge when we do work, groups like United South Broadway that do community work like this, our biggest challenge is to make sure that we don't price out the historic residents. There's that tipping point that you have to always keep your eye on. Mm-hmm. And so we're always having to balance that, gentrification versus keeping a space for people who have lived here historically, an affordable space, and the preservation of the culture.
Right.
That's as important as anything else. How we do things, how we engage with each other. So we always want to keep an eye to making sure those pieces are in place and strong enough to withstand other people coming in. We want you to join in. We don't want you to come in and try to destroy that. You want to build on it, we're good.
Yeah.
But this is our bedrock.
Or not displace.
That's right.
Move out.
That's right.
Well, that's really interesting. And that kind of brings up the fact that United South Broadway has been involved in youth development since its inception too. That's kind of a key part of keeping neighborhoods stable, and so
affordable housing, small business development, and youth development have been key pillars for us. Well, you can't leave the children out. That's our future generation. That's who's going to run this neighborhood when we're not here anymore. And so we have to make an investment in them. So, and I believe that you start on the early side, and I've kind of looked at education and been a part of we had an after-school program. We've worked with the University of New Mexico to do the original community schools network that's still in business today in Albuquerque. But we started that in these neighborhoods. Myself, Dr. Michael Morris from the University of New Mexico, and Dr. Ira Harkavy from the University of Pennsylvania, the Netter Center. He was a partner. He had two partners in the Southwest. One was in Colorado and one in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we were that group. And we were the whole effort was really about community schools kind of thinking, university partnerships with the community. It's like I said earlier about having a university sitting in old historic neighborhoods, but not contributing. Well, University of Pennsylvania was the same way. West Philadelphia, So that's where it was. And they felt and knew that in order for them to survive as a university, they have to go beyond the walls of the university into those communities and take those resources out there. And so Dr. Harkavy had a grant through Reader's Digest that he was putting out so that started our after school program. We started it with that and that's when we created our community garden. We had the first community garden in Albuquerque. It was just a residential lot, and it was vacant, and we began to do a community school, a lot work, growing food for the neighborhood for one, and just actually trying to bring our children in touch with the earth. And, so our after school program kind of evolved into the Youth Conservation Corps, where there was a Senator Romero that told me, you really ought to do this. He had told me that many years ago, but we weren't ready. But at some point we became ready. He said, what were you talking to us about? Yeah. We're ready for that now. And so we began to hire young people age 14 through, I think I went up to 19, 20, maybe a little less, because I don't think 14-year-olds ought to be working around with older people like that, because they're young. And so we would go 14 to like 17 in high school,
right, a good
giving them,
age cohort.
yeah, and then giving them opportunities to go into the Bosque. So we were called the Bosque Youth Conservation Corps. Those projects are funded by the state of New Mexico. And we went in and we gave, our kids needed income, not only for the things they need to go to school and that kind of thing, but also to make a contribution. And we really talked about that with our kids. You're working now, you're making minimum wage. They got minimum wage. You know, they were above minimum wage. Their parents were working for minimum wage. We paid our kids at that time above minimum wage.
Wow.
And they were going and said, you've got to contribute to your family. So when you get paid, you give your mom and dad some money and then you go buy whatever you wanted. But you always pay yourself, pay your parents, and then you play. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a way to
savings,
and it's
family,
about teaching them.
and
And
self.
one of the things that we did, we brought them in to learn what it means to have a checking account. But the big part of it was having them connect to the Bosque, the actual Bosque, and they would do clearing of down and dead for forest fires. They built benches. They did recreational and informational kiosks. If you go to the Bosque today, you'll see some of the stuff that our kids built out there. Oh. And it just gave them a sense of their connection to nature. And then we kind of said, okay, now let's go back into the neighborhood and let's look around. This is the urban forest. We live in an urban forest. And what's happening in our neighborhoods? Well, the trees are dying. Well, what are we going to do about that? They had learned how to plant trees, long pole, short pole trees, and plant them in the Bosque and for replacement. So we began to cultivate those. And we planted well over 1,000 trees. The kids mapped the neighborhood. They went up and down the streets with a clipboard and they mapped every bush, every tree, which was dying, where it could be replaced. And then we set on a campaign working with Tree New Mexico. Sue Probart was the director at the time. And we began to work together to do tree giveaways. And our Bosque kids would come to the garden, open up the garden on a Saturday and a Sunday. And we invite other neighborhoods to come in and get trees. But then for the neighborhoods, the current neighbors that are living here, we showed them how to plant a tree. We'd take it to their house and show them how to plant a tree. We'd have a little agreement they'd sign saying they would help take care of the tree and how much, and those are the kind of trees that if you take care of them the first year, they'll take off on their own pretty much. So we began to reforest our urban neighborhood because environmental issues, we're sat between a freeway, a lot of congestion downtown, all the neighborhood congestion to the south of us, the air quality. We said, this is important that we do this. And it just fulfills a lot of things that we wanted to do. So then later on, we kind of evolved into a charter school. USBC wrote the charter for the charter school. The Dorn Charter School, named after my parents. Our focus, we're the only charter school that was founded on the principles of anti-racism, environmental justice practices, as well as STEM, understanding the environment, and the environmental justice aspects of that, which is why it was important to understand issues of race in there. So that's what the school operates as, K through 5. And we operate on that principle all the time. And now, of course, we're timely because now we have equity councils that have to be in place from the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. We have the African American Black Education Act. We're poised to do that. And of course, United South Broadway also does the Anti-Racism Institute of the Southwest, where we do training with people across the state. We've been doing for 27, 30 years, working with People's Institute for Survival and Beyond out of Louisiana. And we put on workshops, doing workshops. We bought into their model. And we've used it with banking, having people having access, because we do housing. We got to make sure that people have access to loans, and fair and affordable loans. And so we began to look at the connection between that as well. How do we make sure that people have access to credit and capital?
Yes, credit and capital is kind of those accesses to key things here. And there's one of the programs at the charter school that I think is so great is the birding program.
Oh, yeah.
That, trying to identify the birds in the neighborhood,
and
attract them.
And bringing bees,
and butterflies, and
bees,
insects.
Birds, and butterflies back into the neighborhood. The garden has done that. And it's constant. Everybody likes to start a garden. I tell them, the garden is a living, breathing thing, okay? You can't plant it and walk away. So you better have a caretaker, okay?
Yeah.
You have to have someone who is responsible for the garden, okay? Our garden is a learning garden. It's a training garden, learning garden. Kids go out there and they learn, and they document the growth of things, and they have the medicine wheel garden, and they learn about medicines and how they can where natural medicine comes from. And we bring in people from the community, like Sylvia Ledesma from Calpulli Escali.
Right.
She comes in and works with our kids. She was a master gardener. And so we worked with her. We have a Mr. Gonzalez right now. He's a farmer. So he's teaching them a little bit differently around how they do foods and how they do preparation. In some ways, he's kind of looking at historic foods and ancient plants, and teaching them how they were prepared at one time. And so our school is probably one of the most racially diverse. It's a small school, but it's racially diverse because of where we are in the downtown core. So I just want our children to be worldly. And I think we have to start them early. You can make an impact with a child if you start early. When they get to another age, you're competing with too many other outside forces. So if you can get them on the right path, I think early on, let's face it, we know that if a child is not reading by 3rd grade, they're building a prison cell for them. That's what the research tells us. And so we've got to keep our children out of that pathway.
Right. Those young kids, they're so open to
Oh, yeah.
everything. They're so excited.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.